Hello. Sorry, just having to clear my throat out here since I have to cram dinner into my face right before all this starts anyway. How's everybody doing? I see Kaza's in chat already. Good to see you. Well, tonight should be interesting, I think. The primary functions that we're going to be working with here are just a lot of the stuff that I've been working over the weekend and kind of chit-chatting about that and going over it. And just kind of covering a few basics because there's going to be some smaller changes and that kind of thing going around. Not with me, it was just like the channel in and of itself. Had some stuff commissioned out so it can look pretty cool. Specifically, I had somebody help me with getting some things going here, and she was quite helpful. And the person whom I'm speaking about is this Kayla Francis, Kayla GFX, who was responsible for doing some of the work for me as a sampler. She helped to create some things like this to help sort of spruce up the channel and make things look even more interesting, or at least more themed towards the stuff I like to see. So, and she did a fantastic job. And I'm going to be thinking about how to push that over, but shout out to her and check her out. She's got some cool stuff. Yeah. Copperfield was the last donate. Yeah. Well, y'all constructed that one there, didn't you? So speaking of last session, actually, um, God, what a that session was just it was great. The only thing I found myself doing though is I rewatched a lot of it. I just go like, ooh, like it's only because I want to spend so much of my time. He donated IP. Yeah, yeah, he did, right? Like the gentleman he was. So last session was such a banger that it's kind of hard not to like go back over it again and again and again. It's very uncommon for me to finish a campaign, especially nowadays. It wasn't as uncommon when I was younger. When I was a lot younger, no issues. I wound up having multiple campaigns, most of which were not technically finished, but the sheer number of that were far outweigh however many sessions I've gone through in consistency and then uh, finding its way to a conclusion. Like, that doesn't necessarily happen very often. I had a campaign just prior to this that lasted a little over 2 years, but it never reached the end point. It kind of got stuck in the midst of, like, right before things kind of got nuts. And it was sad that it happened. I had a friend who was heavily invested in the character he built. My ex, you know, she was involved with it, and I had a whole bunch of friends involved too, and we just never got around to finishing out. One of them had a baby, the other one, we moved, then our friends moved, then just shit went everywhere. So no luck. That was pretty much it. I had another campaign that came close that I didn't even run, which is another unusual thing, and that was done in 40k for the Warhammer. Um, for the Warhammer. It's not a genre. It's for Warhammer 40k specifically. Um, the best that I could hope for was just kind of getting as many people together after the fact, getting people's. Oh my god, I don't know why. Stop. Kill that. I think I've got another lurker in here for weird sounding songs. Yep, there it is. Forgot to get rid of it. Yep, there's the other one. Alright, can't be too careful. Anyway, yeah, so after everything had gone out and moved, getting into sessions was just utterly impractical. Adulting, as it were, and then I had 3 kids of my own, and that just made it worse. Never lost my fire for this stuff. So, highly successful campaign that ended 2 years, only a few days after 2 years. So, damn near on the anniversary itself, the campaign came to full circle. And that was it was initially called Trouble in Neverlands, which was apt because the team, the crew, and everybody kind of went around Night City, not necessarily through it. And oftentimes there were a great many different things happening, and it was also what we would refer to as like the 1.0 variant of Shadows as a whole. So that's changed. It's become now 3.0 because we've gone just making sure that it's like, and I can only boost up that high because it's not even like I could stop at a tenth of a version and say like, okay, it's new. We would make huge changes, and it would just reorient the entire system, and then we would find ourselves at from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3, and now we're at the incremental point where only small stuff is really changing. So yeah, and what that caused in retrospect is that we've got session 0 only 2 days away now before the next one kicks off, and I find myself in need of being prepared. The most critical thing I think that's going to happen with the next session here, or like with the next campaign, is going to be a really strong focus on like the inner machinations of shadows in what Night City really is. It's um, you know, and when I was referring to cringe earlier, it was because it was kind of. I suppose that probably not a lot of people would really pay that much attention, but for me, I notice these things whenever I'm talking, speaking. If I start sputtering sound effects and things like that, if I were better at it, it wouldn't feel so terrible. Yeah, cringe. The the thing about this, I want to tell compelling stories. Now, I don't. Um, there's not like I have the perfect party size. This is what's cool is that the sweet spot for me is always 3 to 4 players, somewhere in there. And if I'm lucky, I might actually get another session 0 in the next 2 weeks if things go right. Just got to plan on getting some people together, probably 3 people. And you know, if you're in my server, which is the other thing too, is that you know you should check me out on some of these other things. Like we've got a Discord server that we use. Uh, we're running light. We need people to jump in, check it out. Start checking some other stuff out and seeing if they want to be invested or a part of some of this stuff because I'm wanting to push forward. Because we're right on cue, man. Yeah. Good to see you, Melf. Howdy. We're right on cue. I'm thinking that by the end of this year, exactly as I had hoped, or even sooner, we might finish up during the summer, depending on how fast things go. But I can't make any promises because this is kind of this group team effort that I don't force anybody into. Hot melfs. God. Looking to RPG. RSVP. um, yeah, we're making hella good progress. It's starting to come right along. So I'm extremely excited to see where it goes from here. So kind of what we're looking at is like I said, somewhere between end of summer, end of year, somewhere in that vicinity, if not immediately the next year over. But I'm so confident in how we're doing and how fast it's going. Um, Outside of any unforeseen delays, no later than February of next year, for sure, at least in my mind, are we going to have something that is absolutely beta testable that can be um, packaged up real nice and pretty like and shoved into people's laps to try out. Um, and we'll have to run some stuff over. So, like I said, check us out on Discord. It is in my About section and should link you right to it. Um, the the other thing is that all of these go saved into YouTube, and I'm going to start dipping my toes into that and making a lot more effort to just kind of like probably some things, you know, things that are short. Yep. Thank you, sir. It's going to be so much short videos at first because editing is exhausting. Not unfun, just exhausting. It takes a lot of effort. And so if I start with the shorter stuff and get used to it with the tools and the rest of it, I'll start to build bigger, better ass videos over time. I'm thinking about doing replays as a start. All of that out of the way, we are, or at least I am, going to be pushing for major shifts in what the experience has been so far. One of which is being able to explore a lot more of Night City and its, you know, the underside of it. Being completely honest, the underground, low town, corporate zone, all those little idiosyncrasies that weren't necessarily explored. But I'm also going to be jumping into what it's like to have, you know, people to depend on and dependents to care for, families and apartments and businesses and all that other fun stuff, because we had sort of jumped in with the last one at such a sort of a larger than life level to begin with to get right to the good juicy bits. The the way things pan out from here is going to be a lot more detailed, a lot more granular. We'll have an investigation into what it's like to be at the bottom, so to speak, at least for those people that don't actually wind up as, corporate to start with. So here and now, it gets into a conversation about, what are some of the things that you can actually play, and so these things are pretty much readily available. I only have, at this point, if it shows, shrink this down just a bit. Doink, doink, doink. Yeah, I've only got 3 left of these particular little dealios. And these are called milestones. Milestones are something that kind of help reward it rewards the player for showing up, so to speak. It's not a participation trophy, though, because, if a GM gets really spiteful, I suppose, or at least a little frustrated, they can always deny a milestone or at least deny a session count if you're a pain in the ass, or a dick, or whatever. Not that they need extra tools, but it could be used. Yeah, I can zoom in a bit. There's a lot of information, too, so I'll probably have to shift it left and right and such. Bom, 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 bom. Ha ha ha! Let me adjust I don't know if I can push the size of this. Ooh. Oh, dude, this is gonna look weird. How do the tables fare? Oh, they didn't do too bad. Let me push it over a little more. Yep, just a wee bit. There we go. There. Still pretty much not going to fit. I'm sure there's a way to, do it a little more subtly. Anyway, it's probably about as good as it's going to get. There we go. I think that's got everything. Yeah. Anyway, so been working on these, and there are a lot of these. We have with the so I'm getting all scrambled. So with the humans, they're basically what you would expect. In that, and this is our whole thing right here too. Is that we got a bunch of stuff that's happening. But yeah, it's unreal actually, just how much there is. I want to go over this far and push it back this way. Why does it keep resizing? There, just as long as I can see everything without having to worry about it. There you go. So, okay, Session 0 is going to have all of this stuff available to it. That's kind of the crazy part. We're pushing it out. This is Shadows 3.0, first time ever. Everybody's so funny about the Copperfield. Fair point there, Kaza. Thank you much. Yeah. I think that covers it. So, with that being said, the choices right now are, you've got, I'll get to the top here just because you can see how much information there is. There's just a shitload. There's going to be the human factor always shows up. It's always there. How do milestones work? Okay. And simply put, milestones are a way of calculating, sort of. Think of it as a combination between real life circumstance mixed with, a reward for your character based on the effort you actually put in. IP still counts because you're organically developing everything on your character sheet as you go along, be that skills, be that stats, powers, all of the above. All of that is affected by improvement points or IP, right? Well, milestones are those fun little gifts that add incentives to come along because they give you more. Wow, you're just blasting me over there. Machine gun! They allow you to be able to play the game, get something out of it, even if not necessarily something is to happen that would be like a critical moment, but you feel a sort of a level of accomplishment. So every 5 sessions that you get a chance to play in, which is approximately anywhere between 10 and 20 hours. That's a lot of time dedicated to a single thing. So if you get, so 5 sessions in, you get yourself a minor milestone, which is, something that anybody can get in terms of their characters. It doesn't have a specific element or, it doesn't have any kind of specific point or specific archetype that it ties to. Every archetype has access to this, and they can develop in that same way. The major ones, the major milestones, they happen at the tens point, because it's every 5, every 10, every 5, every 10. So 5, 10, 15, 20. At 5 minor, 10 major, 15 minor, 20 major. So it goes like that in sequence. And it, so you track your sessions, you know exactly how far you've gotten, when your next milestone's going to hit, and it makes it something that you can look forward to. And the minor ones are basically things like stat upgrades or, kind of adding something to a skill. It sounds like, it is what it sounds like. It is just a sort of a minor impact on the character sheet, but noticeable, and gives you just a little oomph. The major ones are ways of rounding your character out. Yeah. 1 milestone a month is roughly it. If you're extremely enthusiastic about the gameplay, and you're like, we're just gonna start cranking sessions 3 a week, yeah, you'll start seeing that advancement. Obviously, just kind of push through because it's a little crazy. Which I've been in that particular department. I can't imagine how souped up some of my characters would have been if I'd had a milestone system like that. Or if you get really into it, I would suggest that if you're playing close to 20 hours a week, like I used to do, or damn near 40, because I shit you not, I was pretty much facing dice forever when I was a teenager. So it was just persistent and constant. You could do it by hours, 5 hours a whack if you were really pushing it that hard, because that's a lot of time. But I would say that the pacing of it is perfect. 1 per session is a good count. Yeah, see, when I was a teenager, I was hungry for something, and whenever I ran into D&D Second Edition, that was the something I needed. It made my crazy make sense. It's kind of like giving somebody who's got some issues with talking to themselves, and you just give them a Bluetooth earpiece, and it looks like they're on a phone all the time. Immediately makes them look sane. D&D was kind of my thing. It made me do that. So, taking into account that these milestones allow you to get something out of your physical time, I don't know, it's a kind of currency that gives your character a little bit of panache, but it also allows you to kind of build a narrative around the character that is specific to you, that kind of has a mystery note to it, because the character doesn't necessarily understand why this is happening. They just kind of develop or understand or realize that it's something they can do. And holy crap, does that make a difference? It makes a difference in the sense because everybody can kind of relate to an experience that does that. All right, so yeah, the milestones are being constructed. Like I said, I'm 3 away from totality here. Gonna, it's gonna be a big, it's gonna be a big deal. So when it comes down to it, like I said, these humans starting off, they get 2 kind of subsets or sub-archetypes. You have either the professional or you end up with the cyborg. And, there's a lot of work that was invested in both sides of these. Now, the professional sounds kind of like what you might expect, um, because these are the types of, you know, elements, or I should say themes, that you can bring about for what you want to play. So it's kind of like, it's probably the closest element to a class system that exists in Shadows. It's the closest one. But it kind of stops here. You basically say, this is kind of what my focus is going to be. They all have their own traits. Yeah, like the cleaner, it's, generally there are a few names that a cleaner will go by. Assassin is a common one, but killing is not strictly the sole focus of this profession. In fact, there is a great deal of time spent on learning to cover tracks, obscure the motive of the kill, and clear unwanted evidence in a scene of a crime. These talents are useful for a lot of people, the powerful being the most common client of this sort of work. The inherent risks for cleaners authorities I think I meant to say, but their own clients if they make mistakes. Cleaners can be killed for botching a job by another cleaner if they are not careful. So it kind of gives you a premise to work with. This is just, I don't know, sort of a minor aid for people that want to develop a character. They may not be completely clear on what their concept is or that kind of stuff. So this kind of gives you a bit of a booster, which does not remove by any means creating your own thing, which will be something that gets covered in other books and such. Um, Roger that, Melf. So, they all kind of get some traits, they get focused skills where they have just a little bit of a kick to it, where they don't have to spend as much to enhance those particular skills, and then they get traits that make them sort of unique. Kind of, again, with the cleaner, they get this ability called Vanish, which, adds a plus D4 to stealth checks in particular. And your character is naturally good at concealing themselves, even in broad daylight, which makes them very hard to spot and can even fool the supernatural when done correctly. Broad supernatural abilities like Aura Sight, anything that's in line of sight can be detected even through walls, or Life Sense detects life of the creatures in a certain range, must be warded off in some other way. Process, hard at work, doing the editing. Yeah, so it basically just kind of gives you this premise that you've got to get how you kind of have the Batman effect if you really want to go for that. But each one has their loadouts and their specific setup, including prerequisites for the type of stats that we want them to have. And then these are the various loadouts that are available that come with it. And then, of course, all their milestones, which are going to be applicable to both Cyborg and professionals alike. Now, Cyborgs, I'll give you a little taste of this. Cyborgs get a budget at the start if that's what they want to focus on, or if you want to focus on being one, you can get yourself all borged up, ogged out of your mind, so that you can go out there and do stuff that most people can't because you're just full of gear. Head to toe, even something close to full conversion, that kind of stuff. But this takes it a different way. So, there's not... I have to say there isn't necessarily a terrible huge difference with cybernetics in this case from a lot of other systems, meaning that a lot of these ideas have already been sort of hashed and rehashed time and again, but we're pushing the envelope in other ways. Just kind of my own tweaks, stuff like that. So we are still working with the possibility of sanity loss as being one of the things you get for it. We may have to pull that out if it comes too close to interlock, but I liked it, so I wanted to see if I couldn't throw it in there. There is inspiration in here all over the place. Now, here's where it gets to be pretty in-depth. All of what you see here is all of the cybernetics, possibly and readily available, price tags attached, with descriptions of what they do, how they function, like all of this. Just do. everything you could possibly want. There's just a huge store. Kid in a candy shop if you've got the right mindset, right? We're talking weapons, armor, EMP shielding, body and limb replacements, enhancements and augmentations, just the works. Well, you know, Bilbo, so you should just do what you feel is right, man. Make all the characters, then pick one. And we have details in here with, how they all fit up. So the usual, yeah. So, and then of course we have, what are these guys? Yeah, these are just, we've only hit into the eyes now. And then we have auditory implants and functionality. And then, like I said, we've got some interesting, yeah, these are the big boys. These guys right here. These are full body augmentations. And they are gnarly and they're expensive. So I don't know which one of these, because we've got, yeah, the Power Man is like your basic, because it kind of gives you a sort of concept as to what's going on with each one of them. This is just basically internal body stuff. This is something to do with the synapse of the brain and improving your reaction time and all of that. This deals with armor and the outer flesh and doing some kind of nanite weave into the skin so that things operate the same way, but it's not nearly as permeable. And then this one here is one of the more expensive ones, because what it does is it gives human beings a regeneration rate of a sort. They're immune to poison, alcohol, all of that. So and like I said, this is ranging up to, more or less like, 45 grand is pretty significant. That's buying yourself an entire car all at once. So it gets to be pretty intense, right? Now, I guess it's sort of a thing about why all of this. I think I get to show off something that... So, probably best to actually cover something about Night City in and of itself, per Scott and his wonderful work within everything, because we can actually cover this and have it make sense. Here we go. Let's expand it just a wee bit before I move it over. Here we go. Melfur. Yeah. So this kind of breaks it down. So yeah, it's not just a whole bunch of chicken scratch inside of a OneNote. It's actually got some real meat to it. Yeah, so 1982 to 1998. We're doing a parallel timeline of a sort, where it was kind of a what if, and then let's just go crazy with it and see what would happen. So there was a huge, yeah, lots of meat on them bones. There was a huge revolution in the 80s where robotics got a massive boost. Huge breakthroughs with being able to do a large amount of industrial work at a rapid pace. Now, this is sort of happening prior to a collective conscious occurring inside of the network, because the internet moved at about the same pace that it did normally. So things didn't really kick off until mid-90s in terms of that sort of technology. So, ideas and things that went along those lines that were considered to possibly be unorthodox or otherwise unwise, didn't really hit or make an impact. So what you find is an explosion of heavy lifting spawned a whole generation of new jobs and remarkable progression in the construction of new buildings and facilities. That's what they kind of pushed. And, shortly thereafter, we have this sort of craze and acceptance that, the cybernetics that were being created and, originally just kind of motorized prosthetics and mildly, like early forms of computing were kind of pushing in this direction, making things a bit more accessible and becoming more complex. But, in the early 2000s, some of that technology really took off again. Well, we had the facilities. We had the capability of producing this technological advancement at rapid pace because we had the ability to just create the space for it. And we took it off. Now, corporations, of course, got their hands into it and started making themselves sort of godly, I guess you could say. Just a little bit godly and unshakable despite everything else. So they started to push in. Which, in order to sustain what they had in mind, industry being the core focus, it's the whole, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they followed that to a rather poisonous degree. Since industry was the big thing, they wanted to see exactly how far they could push that. And they were going quick. So this kind of details the whole thing about the neural user interface and being able to employ the internet in a way that was not possible by us, where you could go brain deep, allowed for a revolution in the net in the Wild West days in the early 2000s. Yeah. So, prior to this, there was kind of a revolution, a neural technological revolution, where ideas and things were being swapped around even faster than they are now. And the conveyance of these ideas only got better over time. So this spawned how do we get ahead of this? How can we make this work? And they started to push for a full overture of the industrial revolution that they wanted, which here it is. Night City is the New York territory expansion, and the most critical thing that came from that was the entrenchment of the corporation. It was highly, highly, highly entrenched, and not gonna change anytime soon. So when you're dealing with this part of it, you had a bunch of high-level force going for and against simultaneously to make certain changes occur. Now, your common guy didn't get a chance to really make much of the circumstances that he was in. And there were a lot of purported, this is going to be good for humanity, this is going to be this is going to be that. Lots of stuff like that. And the sad part is that kind of analog to what we've got going on today is that just, your common guy doesn't get acknowledged. The people that are on the ground are the ones getting stepped on a lot. I can't seem to find that picture right now. Pull up my map here. I think I'll find it in a second. But yeah, so the common man doesn't really get much of a say, and it's a real drag. It's a real drag. So they kind of did what they wanted to do. They ended up getting inside of all of the different financial institutions, making absolutely certain that something like this could continue. So yeah, it started out here in this particular region. Um, so these sections, like kind of like last time I talked about, these sections here were brought about by huge consolidations of major corporations, big time. So North Quarter is the name given. Central City District, same thing. Daedalus Belt there. The South Side Consortium. Now, so that's actually being more direct, um, given the fact that, this is more accurately the name of the consortium that still holds power in this region. But yeah, these are all the different zones that culminate into it, and they built from all the major cities in these areas and expanded to such a degree, uh, that there was just high level demand. Now, you can't expect that a project of that size and vastness would be able to sustain itself for terribly long. Just raw materials alone would be astronomical. But somehow or another it got pulled off, and there was a huge condensing of urban expanse all throughout here. But the dream was to basically create a place that had it all over. You couldn't go 2 or 3 blocks without finding exactly what you needed. Regardless of where you were, or, you could always have assets, resources, and available elements ready at hand for whenever you needed it. And the premise of it sounds kind of a little soft, but that was the premise, Yeah, but to the extreme. Like if it was 50 Starbucks on every block, you know. And that's also the reason why you get like the mass advertisements and everything just kind of blasting off, because it is something of a a tumor. I don't know exactly how else to describe it. It's sort of a cancerous tumor that exploded because it's just overdeveloped and sort of unusual in its construction, and not all the parts of it went like it was supposed to. Certain projects got abandoned in mid-work, and it just kind of fell through. It fell out. It collapsed onto its own under its own weight, and so you've got plenty of sections that do that. Most of which either became condemned or now are used as combat zones where people just don't give a shit about blowing stuff up. Yeah. 38 years of continuous work. That's basically it. But that should give you a perspective. 38 years to build something of that size, that's not nearly enough time. That would be like, the Hoover Dam kind of getting thrown together in 6 months. No, that's not going to happen. So somehow or another, they pushed this incredibly crazy project into action and sustained it for a solid near 40 years and managed to make it work pretty much the whole time. Which then obviously makes, all of these different. So these corporations are the ones that we're basically kind of keeping for now. Yeah, so we have Miltech, which is primarily military weapons and research. High Dynamat, which does kind of everything. They're sort of the smorgasbord, but if anything else, they're kind of the completely psychopathic corporation, like inside and out. They have pretty much no real chance of. It doesn't seem like they have much of a chance of redemption because their focus is really just kind of conquering greed. Then you have Arasaka, which is vehicles and weapons for the most part, robotics. Black Sun, which is kind of the polar opposite to High Dynamat. They're focused on all kinds of things. Pretty dynamics, yeah. And then you have Neurodyne Industries, which is the new guy on the block. They were sort of an underground contender and found themselves into the big leagues after all. Now, they've had many years to start setting up their boundary lines, their borders, and pushing together all different kinds of collaborative, just kind of a collaboration of warfare and making certain that the real fighting happens behind the shade, and everything else that happens in front of everyone is only a small sliver of the real deal. And it just composes itself into this guise of doing what's right for others, when really, in fact, it's just greed and corruption kind of masked over. Sounds oddly familiar these days. Wasn't trying for that whenever this was developed, because I've been running this stuff for like 20 years now. So this was the story I had back then. Then, yeah, the glamour and lies. And so we've reached this apex point. This line right here is super important, actually. There are no heroes anymore. This is the part where Shadows really kicks off. It's super important to know. It's really important to know that this is kind of the threat, not necessarily a fact. Just, you can't find them. They really are rare and unbelievable. Probably more unbelievable than most supernatural beings. If you were to encounter somebody who had genuine compassion for somebody else and wasn't just thinking about themselves, it would just blow the cap off of everybody's head. And there's a good chance that they'd probably get shot out or shot and killed and the rest of that stuff, because the thing about people in general is that they have a tendency to really enjoy kind of going on the same path over and over and over again until they figure out that it doesn't work. But it's usually a lot too late in the lifetime they sort that out by the time they get there. So, yeah. This is kind of where things get crazy, too, is that you get to see that there's mercenaries, fae, demigods, vigilantes, that's got to be corrected. Then we have, like, yep, cybernetics and professionals, on and on and on it goes. There's just so many. Yeah, and then once we get to that point, but the next thing is that here we are in present day, right? 2074, this is the starting point for any campaign that you would want to go. You can always push it forward, backward, wherever you want to go, but really this is kind of where it starts, at least for this, lore-wise. It is everybody in Lowtown, which is pretty much, on streets or street level. Everybody at street level is kind of at a struggle at this point. It's kind of like trying to find a point of survival and making it the most palatable survival you can manage. It's escaping into fantasy worlds. It's trying to find the right drug that's going to make you kind of blitz out and forget that you're in this hellhole. Pulling enough credits together to keep that, some gang off your back. Maybe you're paying out tithe so that you're not having to worry about your store getting graffitied or broken into. Stuff like that. Typical scarcity problems, usually that show up in here, and Shadows is full of them. Night City is full of it. So this is pretty much the descent, which, to be perfectly clear, the rest of this whole thing sounds like a descent. This was more like the escalation as it was building up. And the escalation was all of the mistakes, the cumulative mistakes of the corporate, the political misgivings, and how everything just kind of got all jacked up in the middle of it all, and winding up with this kind of this dirty demonic baby of a dream that just didn't make it, and it just wound up being this kind of sick version of itself that was never intended. And that's the escalation point where it finally peaks out. So now we've got shit in the bed and everybody's got to sleep in it. So what do? What do these people do? A large number of individuals will probably give up. Some good majority of them, even in spite of that, will probably be the fighters, the rebels, the the ones that are kind of doing the right thing, even though that seems to be sort of obscured by personal need. And so that's what it means when it says that there are no heroes left. Is that the common way of looking at things, the typical fashion uh, that you might find yourself involved with is one of stealing away and cutting off and compartmentalizing and taking out anything that could possibly make you human, because that's vulnerability in a nutshell. So what do you end up doing? Well, yeah, this is one of the one of the cool art pieces that we actually found that we can use. But this is basically it. Is that when you start getting into the underground and the rest of it, you start finding stuff like this. And let's see here. Yeah, I think I'll just go through it. But the coffin buildings are common. These are highly packed. People are stocked in like sardines. Communal showers, some work, some don't. They're all a risk. They're loaded down with people that are out of luck or homeless or worse. And so it's kind of a miserable place. But by contrast, where you have a lot of this other stuff, you can see that there's higher level technology and other sort of strange beasties kind of moving about, doing their thing. And there's this point where you can live above all that, the gunk, the grime. As Johnny Mnemonic says, he doesn't want to live here with the dogs and the garbage and last month's newspaper floating back and forth. That's basically the long life that most street level characters will probably be invited into. Those who are lucky enough to start out as corporate, they won't even know. They'll have a concept. They might travel out of one zone into the next, but the concept of what they're dealing with, they'll be utterly out of touch with that for the most part, because who doesn't have access to whatever the hell they want? It's generally the corporate greed that allows people to live that dream that they originally had thought of, but they didn't count on millions upon millions of people really just jumping in there to get it going. So, yeah, this is basically Welcome to Shadows right here, where you're dealing with, private military, advertisement, strange supernatural. Like, this just epitomizes the whole damn thing. All of it. You see the garbage here in front. Every bit. This picture just epitomizes that. This is it. This is the real deal. So that's kind of what humanity is struggling with, and it is going to be a fascinating run to find out if there's going to be others that will be able to push past this utterly dark status quo. I was watching this thing on Arcane and watching Arcane again today, and I realized that this is the kind of stories that I want to tell, or the stories I want to write. Apparently, it's a genre called grimdark, which is hilarious. And from what I heard, Sanderson approves it as a masterpiece, the show Arcane. And if you don't know Brandon Sanderson, then he's an author who writes some pretty incredible books, really really fat ones too. You can look up like the Stormlight Archives or the Mistborn. Those are some of his like sort of, I don't know, most well known type stories. But he's a hell of a writer. Yeah, thick, double thick. Because of how he writes things, I've discovered that he's kind of formulaic. And while being formulaic, he actually manages to disguise it extremely well as being something organic. Like, that seems to be his primary method. But what I found interesting is that his take on Arcane was kind of, he details it as a masterpiece, but it's a masterpiece with a caveat attached. Like, I can hear it in his voice. It was a podcast on YouTube, if I'm being specific. He just does a full review of it. But I listened to that review, and he was nitpicking certain things that I found to be kind of fascinating. Kind of his thought, as an example, was that Jinx being mentally unstable and the fact that she was, led to kill as a part of her instability. Him and the host were both like, "Well, that doesn't happen." It's like, it does. mental instability does cause that kind of thing to happen, and if she's dissociative in that particular way, she would. But that's a gripe for later. So I didn't necessarily agree, but his take on it was kind of fascinating. But Arcane is the kind of story that very well, depending on where they go with it, very well could be the kind of story that I want to tell it in Shadows as a whole. And that would be, you're faced with the utmost, absolute, completely high-level darkness in your life, and you have the opportunity at that point to do what most people can't. Like, it's not what people would realize. It's a chance to do those things that make you heroic, because there is such an absurdly low capacity for it on a general level. So being so sunken into the depths means that the opportunity to do the opposite and have an impact is much, much higher. And it's actually so high that it's terrifying, usually to anybody else who wants to keep most people from making or achieving anything of note. So, yeah, that's kind of the human story as a starting point. So, who knows? We don't know who's going to pick what. Anybody could be anybody, but we've got Professional and Cyborg as a starting point. Now, these guys are probably the shortest in here, but the only reason why that is the case is because I have spells to write. I have so many spells to write. It's a little ridiculous. There are so many. But Arcanist. Okay. How do I best describe this? Everything's got, especially in fantasy, you've always got some form of magic user, and in this case they usually often get split into various subversions of themselves. The typical ones from Dungeons and Dragons would be like, you've got Wizard and Sorcerer, and then you have Warlock now, which originally was just Wizard and Sorcerer. I think originally before that it was just Wizard. But they keep splitting it in multiple different ways, and they have popularity, really good popularity, because who doesn't want to be slinging spells around and doing all that kind of crazy shit? So the Arcanist takes this into a totally different way. Again, a lot of this stuff has inspirations from two main sources, Interlock and White Wolf. Now, that's the inspiration only in this case. It has changed around now to where it is not their stuff anymore, it's mine. There are a lot of ways to kind of like demonstrate that. So there is this specifically this energy that's referred to as ether, which is not an uncommon terminology, but ether is that cosmic energetic force that permeates through everything. You know, most people don't really have access to this, at least at the start. Originally they didn't, but there are going to be people who do. So Arcanists are intrinsically human to start off with. Why they have their own archetype set as opposed to saying professional or cyborg is because they have landed squarely into the realm of the supernatural, even though they're human. That's not to say that supernatural beings don't get magic, or that they don't wind up with powers, etc., etc. All of that is true. They do wind up with that, and there will be specific supernatural archetypes that actually use magic as well. The crowning difference is that humanity seems to be sort of properly poised to be the proper wizards of a sort. They seem to have that sort of attachment necessary. It is not necessarily this, but it's the difference between a lot of like biblical standings where angels themselves were usually considered to be, at least in the folklore I know of, angels were considered to be soulless, but divine. And humanity was always sought after because we had something that was precious, considered to be a soul, that we could always find ourselves. So that's one way of looking at it. But it's kind of a philosophical debate inside of the actual system itself. Nobody really knows exactly how this stuff functions. It's fucking magic. They have figured out how to utilize it, those who've actually woken up. So some years before,
5 to 6 years prior to this, despite the discrepancy in timeline. The main element here is that magic shifted and people woke up. A lot of people woke up. There are a lot more in the arcanist category than there ever was. And with the absence of a global power like the technocracy, who had originally been pruning these people out to prevent an overabundance, and they were good at this, an overabundance of magic showing up in a vulgar sense, this is all the White Wolf stuff, without them present, they now can grow like weeds. And they are. And there's a lot of experimentation going on. And some spells are going to be known. They're going to be referred to as common spells because they're common. You ever wake up in the middle of the night, basically, throwing stuff around your room because you're having a dream that's way too close to a nightmare and you're not in control of yourself, and you're telekinetically swirling some stuff around because you're accidentally evoking powers of ether and magic in your room? Well, you've got some stuff to learn. And there's only a few ways to figure that out. It's to go digging to figure out what the hell is going on. So maybe you had a tutor. Maybe you figured it out on your own and you started self-practice. Whatever the actual case may be, you can still build your character concepts around this idea, but the Arcanist gets to have access to a slew of common spells that they will be able to put into their arsenal, and they'll be able to make up their own magic on the spot using the kind of systemic setup that's in this, which more or less is all the typical things you might conjure up in any major movie, whatever, right down from, say, something close to Marvel, from that over all the way down to like Willow and Lord of the Rings. You can do things that are very similar, and it's improvised. The system will support that improvisation and allow you to do improvisational magic. So you can either improvise it at a higher cost, meaning that you have a higher risk of wearing yourself out or causing yourself damage, or you can go with the common spells, which everybody's practiced and kind of turned into more crystallized, orderly type magic, and utilize that. Depends on what you want to do. So lots of ways to go with it. Now, this is something that gets to be kind of interesting, because like with cybernetics and professionals and stuff like that, the professionals focus on skills. When it comes to the Arcanist, they get other things. They get to focus on their primary point here is tolerance, which is a special stat like will or luck. It has a primary function that's very important, that's coordinated to this. It will have other tweaks down the road eventually. And it is the one thing that basically says, yes, you've cast so much magic today that if you try to do it again, you're either incapable or you run the risk of blowing yourself up. Just because you have a higher and higher chance with lower and lower dice pools of, if you roll a 1, you botch that out, you can't really get out of it. Even if you run out of luck to boost it up or explode it, then you're just playing with fire, So the fewer your options, the worse things get, and that's what tolerance manages. It basically has a way of capping out exactly how much you can push without without making it this sort of like, spend this many points and do this and la la la. The Supernatural have that in particular to like let things off. Now, what makes them kind of unique are these things specifically. You kind of get these 3 elements here automatically. So resonance just means magic creates a trail. It has a tendency to be it's minorly mutagenic, and it's not a brief exposure. Even exposure to it for years won't create a permanent mutagenic change. But I say mutagenic because it takes the properties of standard reality and sort of puts it into a minor amount of flux where it's kind of shaky. It doesn't hold together the same way. It doesn't jeopardize the fabric of reality whenever it's just resonance. If you do something directly to rip things apart, that's different. But resonance is kind of the afterglow of any particular spell. This is 2 things fold. Resonance allows you to kind of express your magic in whatever way feels good to you. Shining lights, gusting winds, vapor coming off your body, whatever it is. Like, it basically indicates what the hell happens whenever you start screwing around with ether. Second part of it, though, is the trailing aspect, which means that if you use magic in a place and somebody's savvy enough, their mystical awareness will kick off, letting them know that something's happened and that there's a ambient resonance in an area, meaning the kind of stuff that ain't flashy, but still hangs around. Okay, and then your arcane attunements, which is casting any spells. You don't have to use. This is the typical point cost, point buy, whatever for powers. You don't have to use. Uh, you don't have to use any kind of SFR to pull these off, which is why you have tolerance. Anyway, so instead of doing this, this is kind of a more random deal. Now, these are different kinds of aberrations that you can get as a result, and depending on where you're at with this, you can have a number of aberrations that occur depending on what power level you're at. And these are like little boosts here and there that make you kind of weird as a result. Yeah, like this one here, if I remember correctly. The magic is reactive to some people, and when they touch things, it allows them to hear the whispers of magic within, like literally whispers. It talks to them. There will be a lot more of this in supplemental too, where you can just pick two different, more different kinds of aberrations to do weird, funky things. And then of course the disciplines, which these are separated into three categories. You have evocation, which is on the spot, just blasting stuff out. Uh, think of anything that deals with combat, that's evocation. Because, unless you're really, really good. Oh, yeah. Take it easy there, Kaza. Sorry I missed you there. You probably didn't hear me, but thanks for stopping in. You'll see it later. Kind of intense. What are we listening to? What is this? Oh, okay. Just gotta turn it down a little bit so it's not blasting my head off. Okay. So, evocation is the quick and dirty, oftentimes improvisational if you're going to be doing anything, and it is often the way in which you get exhausted quick. Because the way this works is that rolling any ones in your die pool will count as a point of exhaustion, which is where having high tolerance is necessary, because then you can afford to screw up more. It doesn't wear you out as bad or as quick. Then you have enchantment, which is basically just creating charms or talismans. Lots of good ideas, like creating scrolls, or using cards to have spells on them and toss at your opponents, or lay down the ground or something like that to slide into place because it's convenient. And they have a little bit of a half-life, but they can do the same stuff that regular evocation can, just more easy to trigger, can be done remotely, all kinds of stuff. And then you have alchemy, which is the third and final discipline, the most complex. That will just shake down into creating the artifacts that we all know and hear about in reality today. Like the mythic Excalibur, as an example. That would be counted as an alchemical masterpiece. Somebody knew a lot of magic, knew how to throw it all together, be it, like in some cases, Merlin helped out, or maybe it was a staff that was reforged into a sword, like they did with King Arthur in the movie. You can take it any which way, but regardless of whatever went on, alchemy is the way of creating permanent, powerful artifacts. 100%. But you need to have a certain degree of understanding in each of the disciplines prior, so you need at least 3 in evocation and at least 3 in enchantment, if I have that right. I believe I do. Rank first. Yeah. Yep. So 3 and 3. So you have to have at least 6 ranks bought out before you can even buy 1 in alchemy to start with. Period. So you got to be able to you got to get good before you can make those artifacts. This is where it gets into the, like casting of spells and the magic and all of that, which just relies on your die pools, and they all have their own targets and thresholds. To be explained at a later point. But yeah, milestones again. These things just kind of help boost up, the main the main archetype focus. Like this one here is kind of interesting, is that you can add dice to a single spell for a greater chance of success, and the maximum number of dice that can be added to a spell crafting is equal to your will, which is based, it's a stat, that's a special stat, so you can add up to that many. Once you've enhanced it in this particular way, you take a total of exhaustion with a die penalty to all spells that you can cast. So this wears you the hell out, but if you needed a big boost, that would do it. You could basically put it all together for one big whammy, throw it out there, and hope for the best. Yeah, so in the Arcanists are going to be a massive change compared to what, because it originally was based on a lot of like mage type games from like White Wolf, etc. So White Wolf was doing pretty good, and I wanted to take that and build it in. Probably one of the key things. So the key similarity between the two is die pools of D10s. The lack of similarity is how the spells are cast, and the fact that there's a cap. It's not just simply botching and say, oh, you're done. Luck interplays makes it a lot more different too, because you can counteract at least the botch part of it. You can't counteract the exhaustion that happens regardless. And the one major bit is that these will have tiers. So the common spells will be segregated into ranks, more or less. So anything that requires a large amount of work or a large amount of power, the way that you determine the power of a spell is how big the threshold is. So, if your threshold is pushing, say, 4, that means you need 4 total successes before you can actually count that as even a single success win, because the first success is literally a hybrid of however many successes required to get to that benchmark. And then after that, any successes that come through are treated as normal. So that's how you can treat the power. It makes a significant difference whenever you're actually playing this out, because if you have anything that you want to do that's super powered up, you can tell just how nuts it's going to be by listening to the threshold in of itself. And if you don't have a number of dice that's at least equal to the threshold, your chances of pulling the spell off and winding yourself out are huge. So you more or less commonly want to make sure that you have at least as many dice to roll as the threshold would require. So if you have a threshold 5 spell, you better have 5 dice to roll, because you'd need at least 1 success on each die. At least. To pull that off. Or hope for the best and get dice that explode. So you can push it past that. But chances are, even with 5 dice, you're not going to get 5 successes simultaneously. The odds of that are low. They're really low. So power of a spell, meaning how much freaking oomph you get out of it, that is, yeah. It's very heavily dependent on the threshold. And the threshold does make sure that there is an easy way to tell what's beyond you and what's not. So that, so these are basically people who have come to an awakening. They get all these little added bonuses, and then they can start selecting every 10th session there, they will get one of these guys to pick from. And that means that, and approximately, here by the way, there's 15 each. So the only way you could get all 15 of these milestones is if you play 150 sessions. That's a lot. If you're rocking that out, you're basically looking at either 300 to 600 hours of playtime. So this is built with the long game in mind. Long sessions, long campaigns, lots of fun in between. All right. This is perhaps the biggest out of everything. Oops, too much. Yeah. So let me show you. And going. And going. And going. And going. Yep. Got lots. Going some more. Okay. Um, vampires. So, oh man, the Arcanist is, you know, kind of a mixture of whatever backgrounds you kind of want based on the power level you're pushing or that your GM is pushing, and whatever kind of, so they can fit or model whatever character concept you're shooting for, with the added juncture of, hey, I can do magic. Vampires, on the other hand, have a totally different capacity here, and they, when they started out, again, the werewolves, the vampires, and the Arcanists all sort of centered around, White Wolf and the base concepts there. That was the idea at first, and so we stepped away from that by throwing in a different mechanical experience to make certain that it was ours. And I firmly believe that it works out this way. But this, vampires in particular, got perhaps one of the biggest boosts. Just huge. Those being the background of what vampires are. Now, this history is mostly hidden. And so this is kind of like the juicy bits that you wouldn't normally get just from reading the book. There will be hints, of course, sort of a minor homage to the beginnings of Shadows and how it started, but there won't be anything definitive, so that GMs can kind of construct or create whatever they want based on what they have. There are now more vampires in the population than ever before. To wind it back, we had, I had a character that I built, and this is the other thing too, is you want to kind of think about how your characters want to kick ass, because eventually, if they get somewhere and make an impression, your GM may just make them part of whatever the hell the world is, and continue the story moving on, letting the system do its work. But this is one of those scenarios. But Vasile of Sparta, who was actually the unknown brother to Helen of Troy, was played before Shadows all 3,000 something years prior. He was part of the initial war, the war that, basically the phase that launched 1,000 ships. He was on one of them. And his sister Helen was thought to have been kidnapped. And as it turns out, that's what it looked like. Whenever she was found with Paris, things kind of had a kind of an interesting twist. Now, Vasile, before the ships were launched, spent a rather large amount of time with his own master, who was busy training him in scholarly pursuits, decried himself to have a certain skin disease that would force him to be, unable to go out in sunlight. Didn't know what that was really about. Haha. He had to take an ointment to allow himself to stand out in the sun even for a little bit, or he would burn. And he demonstrated this a couple of times. He was extremely intelligent, however. What Vasile had no idea of was that this master of his was the antediluvian to the Sombra. And so, basically, King Bad Daddy of all the pretty vampires. And so, he was teaching him things that most Greeks wouldn't have had a clue about. But Vasile was his prodigy, and he wanted to work with him as much as possible. When he was a young man and became a warrior, still mortal, mind you, his sister goes missing, and a fair amount of treasure had gone with it. Launched 1,000 ships, and he goes in there to go find and defend his sister, from whom he thought was a truly evil person, who happened to be Paris in this particular narrative. Who is responsible for her kidnapping. Well, at that time, his master reveals the fact that he's capable of very supernatural things. One being levitation and being able to move uh, in and out of the city proper of Troy without having to worry about anything, in spite of the fact that the army was held and contained, and he offered Vasail the chance to go and see. I don't know if he was talking about you. I just think he was saying that he had to. He was just saying have a good night and left. Don't know, Melf. But Vasail was transported from the war camps directly into Troy to the small palace that had Paris and Helen inside of it. And they landed at the balcony of the bedchamber. And there was a scuffle, of course, because Paris more or less demonstrated a strange level of strength and superior fighting technique that only Vasail's master was able to counter in time. And Vasail got injured in that conflict rather severely. Now, of course, he being part of princedom, couldn't be allowed to die, or that would be, horrible for the Greek morale. So he gets transported back to the encampment and is fed something sweet. He has no idea that what's happened is that his wounds had been licked clean to seal them shut by his master, very creepy, and then fed a fairly sizable portion of his master's blood at the time, turning him into what he would eventually become as the vampire. Now, mind you, he had suffered a lot. He'd fought in the first battle and was pretty much drunk on the combat. He was also a skilled warrior at the time. He was drunk on that combat. He was ready to go. He survived the first battle with bells on. Basically felt king of the world until he realized that he was, in the midst of the fighters and killing warriors that were no older than 13 years old, and it shattered his morale. He wasn't able to contemplate that or figure it out, because the boy who died on the end of his spear at the very last moment clearly was too young, and he couldn't quite fathom it. The brutality of it all finally came crashing in after his bloodlust, and then being defeated on the balcony of Helen's at the behest of Helen's captor. That left him even more so broken. And then finally, as a final twist, he ends up being turned and becomes a vampire, much like his master. So he was fairly low generation by its considerations. And despite that, was kept to be somewhat powerless. His master never taught him how to use his own abilities, like being able to grow claws, or how to manipulate certain powers of the vampiric ability. None of that was really taught to him. He was just sort of kept in the shadows about it. Well, his master spins a story of Vasail's death on the battlefield at one point or another due to illness. And he flees to Constantinople, taking Vasail with him. When they arrive, Vasail's still trying to get a grip on this new existence that he has, and isn't quite able to make sense of it. But he's feeling pangs of hunger and having to drink and not really sure what the hell to do about it all. His moral compass is utterly demolished. Then he finds himself in open markets, and this is kind of where his sadistic side sort of pops up, because something about him just felt that freedom was best, and he had this odd kinship with the wild animals and things like that, and he wanted to travel and do things. He wanted to see things, not just be scholarly about them. But he was peeved about some of the treatment of these. One particular tiger called Taisha. Taisha was encaged by this slave driver who had human slaves on top of it. But Constantinople, there he was, running around in these markets, and he ends up befriending this tiger. Now, it sounds a little odd, but you can ghoul creatures as well as human beings. And ghouling was the effect of basically making other entities subservient, but he never used that to its fullest degree. He would create a telepathic connection using that. So feeding small modicums of his own undead blood to these to this particular tiger allowed him to be able to have an empathic connection. And eventually, he did break the tiger out in probably the most vicious way possible, luring the original merchant who was trying to sell the poor thing out for all sorts of stuff, lured him into the cage, and then had him devoured there in the cage as recompense for the maltreatment of this, what he considered to be a beautiful creature. He also met his soon-to-be wife in that same marketplace. Mist was her name. She was an olive-skinned fae who happened to be kind of meandering around and was immediately taken by Vasile, and in spite of the fact that they should not have been really all that into each other, they found each other kind of inseparable. It wasn't until his master tried to assert himself. This is where Shadows can get crazy. His master tried to assert himself on the situation by trying to enthrall his would-be girlfriend and got caught. Now, Vasile is not the courteous sort whenever certain lines get crossed. This is one of those lines. Because she was being taken against her will, he was like, hell no. And in this incredibly lavish bed chamber, managed to get the 1 in a million shot and pulled it off because I think he had an exploding set of dice that exploded 3 separate times on one roll. And all he was going to do, after he had been taught by none other than Nosferatu, who happened to be in Constantinople at the time, who basically said, hey, your master's not giving you all the details here. You should be able to do this. And, what abilities do you have? And he had no clue. And then he found out that his master is just completely full of crap. Happens to come back to this palace where, his master had enthralled the local sultan into offering them room and board. Well, he goes into this thing and stakes his master through the heart using the new claws that he had figured out he could make. 1 in a million shot. 1. He pulls it off. Stakes his own master and diablerizes him right then and there, unequivocally. Which, if you know anything about White Wolf, diablerie is a punishable by death and can cause a blood hunt. Well, they had to leave and were on the run a long time after that, and he ended up ghouling them both Taisha and Mist, with their own consent in the matter, because if he just stopped feeding them blood every month, then they would go back to normal and age like normal and the rest of it. Well, Mist was not full Fae, she was only partly Fae, so partly Elven in specific. So they went around, crawled through like Spain, Europe, into China, went around everywhere, learning everything that he possibly could Mist and Taisha being his day guards and him coming out at night and so on, and then to finally get him their own entourage, the works. He was able to utilize his newfound abilities and explore others, and it just went on like that until finally he started living in Rome, Italy, during their height. Yeah. Take it easy there, Bilbosa. Have a good night, man. So, the place he winds up is in Rome, Italy, right before everything kicks off. And when Rome falls, kicking off the Middle Ages, he basically said, I've had enough. I'm going to bed. He has a sarcophagus made, and he renders a large enough supply to allow him to slumber for many thousands of years, just to skip it all, basically. So he hits fast forward by taking this big old long nap. Just so happens that in the 21st century, he reawakens in the Smithsonian Museum, as they had not managed to figure out a way to breach the sarcophagus due to the fact that they were worried about its contents being completely oxidized and or destroyed, because they could not figure out why the sarcophagus was built the way it was, especially given the fact that it had ancient languages from all over the world inscribed on it, which would not have been normal or usual for any kind of archaeological find, and in Italy, no less. So it boggled the mind. They couldn't figure that out. So they brought it in as this like key discovery. Well, these guys who thought they were going to get into this crap, these dunder-headed grave robbers, decided they were going to pop it open anyway, figure out what's inside, because maybe, sure, the scholarly things might be destroyed, but the gold, the silver, and whatever else that lies on the inside of it, regardless of whatever people thought, that stuff was salvageable and sellable. So they broke it open, woke his ass up, and found themselves dead, as he was in frenzy and ravenously hungry, unable to control himself. So drains them dry, gets Taisha and Mist out, and that is how they kind of begin their entire element. Now, this story just goes on. There was a lot of play that happens on the interim here. In a sort of a synopsis of a sort, he winds up discovering that humanity has gone a bit bonkers. In skipping the Middle Ages, he didn't miss much because he walked into a whole new form of it. As Uguay would say, you often meet your destiny on the road you choose to avoid it. Well, that happened exactly to him. He tried to skip out on all the nasty crap and wound up pretty much dead in the middle of the worst of it. And was only able to build up an empire after sorting out how all the technology worked, figuring out how human beings treated each other, found a plethora of supernatural beings running rampant through all the streets, and it was mind-boggling to him. Well, he was able to start acquiring certain assets, following rumors of certain mystical things, and started to make a name for himself, and then encountered the Giovanni. The Giovanni were formerly the Cappadocians. They were kind of the death cult version of vampires. Still existed, and had a large amount of control over the city streets, especially in the New York, New Jersey areas. Kind of ended up becoming an enemy of theirs somewhat rapidly. As it was, he felt that there was, due to requirement for honor and so on, that, he still held on to these older ideals that, I don't know, he was sort of a stoic in certain ways, but not entirely in the ways that would, Marcus Aurelius would not approve of him. But he had this die-hard feeling, a code of ethics that drove his every move, and countering those would incur wrath, big amounts of it. So he ends up getting his manor house on the shores of New Jersey called Rose Manor, which happens to be inhabited by a demon in every single room that he had to go through and defeat on his own to win the entire house over. Rose Manor then became, it's still called that, but Vasile is now lord and master to it. Making Scott laugh over here. So he is now lord and master to Rose Manor, and this place is filled with riches and the rest of it. And he had to earn this too, by the way. I was just going through it. Holy crap. Well, he gets his power base centered in there, and he starts making major moves in the territories and areas of Night City, in and throughout the sections that were part of New Jersey, or the New Jersey zone, rather, or inside of the, I think it's the Daedalus Belt? Wait, let me just check it. No. It's here in the Central District. So here in these areas, he started making really serious movement and upsetting the power base that was, there by rights as far as they were concerned. And specifically, the Giovanni had a large mafia presence that they utilized to smuggle in their weaponry or their human trafficking for herds and so forth. It was just for their survival as it was much for the corporations. They were none too happy to have to contend with this guy. However, they did not expect him to be so damn resilient. And they kept pressuring him. Eventually, it turned out to become this sort of private war. Then you enter in the Tzimisce and Vlad offering up his assistance because the Giovanni were thorn in his side as well. But that was only because they did one last and final thing that really just got all of these wheels running in the wrong direction. The Giovanni had located a site in Iraq where they were certain it was the Tower of Babel, and they had started advertising this on the news. Scream sheets were going off about it for the people that actually gave a shit, but the corporates and the rest of it, those higher ups, those people took interest because this archaeological find, for those who were savvy enough, meant things. They meant a lot of things. Well, Vasil knew better than to assume that it was just some casual, former dig. He was familiar with all of their history up to a certain point because of his study throughout Europe and China, and learned that they were referred to as Canaanites and so on. The idiots, the Giovanni, in order to rectify their losses and seeking, it's not so much revenge, but a way of getting under his skin and protecting their own interests, decided that they would do a mass culling right there on the Tower of Babel. All of the workers, every last one of them, to the man, were slaughtered en masse and thrown into the pit where they had been excavating the tower, causing a gratuitous and disturbing amount of blood to seep through the bottom parts and drain into it. Invariably, this woke Cain, who had been sleeping underneath that for a very long time, tens of thousands of years. Well, instead of being all, hey guys, this is great, glad to be alive again, he decides that now that he's up, he's treating it like a cranky parent trying to manage all of his children. So he enacts what he believes to be the most pertinent action, which is to create mass genocide of the entire vampire race. Drag them all back into himself and alleviate the circumstances so that he can start all over again and make a perfect vampire race from the beginning. This did not go over well, and he had no love of the werewolves. It wasn't really clear as to why he was attacking both werewolves and vampires simultaneously. The vampires made more sense to those who were aware, but unfortunately it didn't help that nobody could really glean or understand what was going on. So he starts this mass warfare and genocide, and now Vasil does have a problem because he's dealing with the progenitor of all vampire kind and trying to figure out a way to stop him without causing the very thing he's already attempting. Research shows, after some time, that Cain acquired his abilities due to some sort of tainted magic, and because of that, he committed himself to a ritual that wound up in the sacrifice of someone he loved for the sake of his power, and then it destroyed the Tower of Babel simultaneously, causing all of this trouble. And he ended up creating the Antediluvians as his first attempt at siring some new generation of predators. Clearly he was not happy with that, and so a large number of the Antediluvians were on the run, and their ilk were kind of left behind. Cue the finding of the Oblivion Rune and all of his capacities to lure Cain into Wales, where Stonehenge is, and end the problem entirely. He's given certain enhancements through the Rose Manor element, which won't go too much into detail with that because that's for other stuff, GMs to figure out at some point. But he does end up getting some enhancements, and he ends up using this rite at the time that Cain appears to really push, push the victory, which he intended to die. And he said all vampire kind was at its end. He was at its end. He was just going to commit himself and perish along with the rest of his kin. That was the only other option he had left. At this time, he even had a son, but his son was only half vampire, actually. So he was certain that the boy would live. So he commits to this, and the ritual goes well. And as he is dying and collapsing to the earth, and Cain's blood is pooled in the rune that he's constructed, he ends up getting some into his mouth because he falls directly onto it, and he swallows enough of it that a spark of the rest of vampire kind remains. And they're still here, all because of that act. And that's when he kind of fades into NPC land. He was pretty much done at that point, and now rules as the Prince of Night City and manages a lot of the supernatural comings and goings in and throughout. So that was the history of what it started to be. That's what these vampires were originally made from. However, since the ending of that previous campaign and the rest of it, we now have an entirely new element coming into fruition, which is whenever Cain was at its height, at his height, doing all the killings, in a way of staving off the eventual extinction, there was an enormous movement to turn as many mortals as possible as quickly as possible. So all these orphan vampires were just made that evening. A lot of them didn't make it, but there were still plenty. But this kind of woke something else up. When they were created, they had no idea what they were capable of, or how they functioned, or why they were even around. And they had to learn, very similarly to what Visial had to do when he started out, how all this stuff on their own. And, just kind of wreaked havoc for a while. Well, when Adrian Copperfield met his end and a balance was reconstituted, and everything else that was originally a problem, including the technocracy and it vanishing, the truth of what vampire bloodlines would bring kind of came back to the foreground. And all of these caitiff vampires are now unaware whatsoever, who or what Cain is, why he was even there, or what even the hell happened, because they weren't even sure why they got turned in the first place. They were just turned and left. Now they're kind of sprouting out and thinking that they have all of this stuff kind of figured out, and they're learning about the supernatural world, and they have only a small piece. And they are developing powers that come from directly out of their own bloodlines. So, with a little bit of research and the rest of it, we've got the typical stuff, which is that they get a boost to a lot of their physical stats. They are suffering from the thirst, which forces them to drink, otherwise they run out of SFR and suffer penalty. They are vulnerable to things like holy and sunlight and so forth, because they are undead. They are paralyzed if staked through the heart, and they are immune to pain. So they don't suffer the pain penalties that you might get if you were just garden variety human. And they wind up with levitation, the ability to grow claws, causing pleasure or pain whenever they bite somebody. They can choose to make it go one way or the other, but more in particular, instead of causing detriment to the person that they feed on, they actually give them a small inoculation that makes them even healthier. And the reason why that's the case is because survival-wise, they're more symbiotic than parasitic. They don't do as well if they kill their prey all the time. It is something that is, I guess you could say, a bit of a delicacy, but you would have trouble hiding all the bodies. Even in Night City, it would be a difficult task, especially with how many there are. So sustaining their population without notice becomes extremely important, so not leaving a bunch of corpses is great. But this natural ability means that they get their prey gets inoculated against disease and a few other things, and the wounds heal within an hour. They're all gone. So they just heal up on their own, and they kind of get a little boost afterwards. Now, doesn't mean that they're not a little anemic, but they don't feel worse for wear, and of course this is where the pseudo manipulative structure comes in, because biting your prey over and over and over and over again becomes sort of addictive, and you want to be there. So they can get these herds enthralled and they just want to be there all the time. They have the crazy ability of being able to regenerate all damage within a certain limit instantaneously, up to as much blood as they have. And of course, if they run out of that, then they're toast. They can't run out of SFR, which comes from the blood they drink. So, and SFR stands for Spiritual Force Rating. And then you have the Cursed Evolution, which is, getting bloodlines that come across and they can basically choose another thing that comes from out of their current bloodline. Now, there are 6, 7? I don't remember. We're going to have to check this here real fast. There was a lot of them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. So there were 6 of these bloodlines that I had gone through and made. They're all historically pointed, coming from various parts. Dhampir, for instance, that's actually the Albanian variation. You have Metamorph being able to create umbral glass from out of shadows. Yeah, you can do magic with it using Blood Tithe. You have Dark Revelations, which I can't remember what's... Oh yeah, Giving Some Odyssey says a Ghost Fire, which is a Balefire type, more magic again. A Bone Familiar, which this is... these guys are kind of mystical, the Dhampir are. And then you have Draugr, that's the Viking ones. So you've got like Battleborn, Warrior Instinct. These things kind of build up their defense and their capacity. They even have, there's the actual armor and defense element there, and then what is it? The Shroud of Ancient Pirates. Oh, and causing terror in the people that they fight, so that they can get it upgraded. Jiangxi, that is one from China, one of the only ones that we could ever actually really find. They're more like zombies in the lore originally, but we're kind of going full blown, so they get access to things like making various fabrics and such kind of come alive and become controllable. And it's kind of that same sort of Eastern mythological type thing where they can control, large sashes and other like, skeins of fabric and things like that to do, and rope and so on, so they can entangle, wrap up. It's kind of like spider silk, but using clothing and fabric and rope to do the same thing. So they can kind of do that. That's what that's there. They get access to chi abilities. They get really cool defensive, because gotta love Gung Fu. They also have like a life sense, which allows them to be able to detect other creatures in the standby area, and this Dead Lantern ability, which allows them to see past the veil and all the different spirits and stuff, and offers that. Strigoi, that is the Romanian, and this deals in things like trickery and shadows and so forth. So you've got like being able to create darkness around yourself. You have, let's see here. Yeah, Provo Fear. Okay. Oh, basically you can bite your target and they kind of go insane. They start seeing things and hallucinating, and it makes them more vulnerable. Yep, this is for stealthing around, and again, darkness and that whole growing spines out of the body anywhere you've got bones, so like the ribs, ribs and limbs and so forth, your head. The monstrous maw is ridiculous. You can basically just morph your head and twist it to where it becomes this enormous thing, and you could swallow a basketball whole with your nasty toothy maw that you want to get there. Again, just kind of a terrifying thing. And then Rending Claws getting even more of that same fear factor thrown into it, and becoming sort of a war machine. The Upir, that is Russian, and they have things like Frostbite. I couldn't help myself. More or less, it causes something called withering damage, which means that it can't be healed if it's inflicted by, if you were to bite a werewolf with this, for instance, it would count as withering damage, which would be terrifying. It also comes out that whenever you activate it, you have this cold vapor coming out of your mouth the whole time, so there's a warning sign. They also get the, they can resist like magic and other kinds of energy automatically. They can create ice. They're capable of making their strength go through the roof for a short period of time. They can resist being staked, making them even more crazy. And then they have this weird psychic thing where that can prevent them from being, taken over by, psychic attacks. And then we have this one, which is a real mouthful, the Vrikolakas, which is the Greek version. And these guys are the sexy, savvy, whatever you want to call it. They deal in the sex appeal and suave So and enthralling and things like that, like linking your prey to you so you can know what they're about and convince, basically manipulate their minds so they become much more subservient. Using verbal commands to provoke people to do things they normally wouldn't do or to forget you, that kind of stuff. Gaining certain senses so they can see, sense, and really detect what's going on with their prey, like if they've had a lot of drugs, alcohol, or if they're not really fit, they can go with that. And then glamorous visage, creating a sense of aura of awe with their beauty. And then the radiant aura, which blasts that up even further. And then enthrall, which is basically making somebody enslaved to your will in a sense. I believe that this basically gives you control over your prey so that they become really, really enticed by you. And they have, penalties when dealing with, if they try to do anything harmful towards you, it just costs them. So really, really backstabby, manipulative crap in here. But used as a means of protecting themselves so they have a high level of discretion. And then, of course, they get their milestones, right? So kind of just takes what they've got going on and builds up on it. So, but those bloodlines are manifesting now, and what will be part of that lore later on too is there are 5 old ones that are coming out of slumber, and guess what? They're just as powerful as Cain, maybe more so. Nobody really knows, but they are going to take their time. There is no rush. There is billions of people and 5 of them. They've got no concern to push the envelope and come out in the open and go like, hey, we're fabulous, and get themselves put into a position they can't get out of again. But yeah, I mean, vampires are very in-depth. This is probably the longest one because there's a whole 18 pages worth of content here. So that'll be interesting for Session 0 whenever we start diving through that. Now, werewolves are kind of the same breed and style of a sort. They're made manifest in the sense that they were protectors of humanity to start off with, and they are not seen that way now. In Shadows in particular, they have forgotten what their primary mission was. They don't understand and don't realize what their importance is or how they function. They're just kind of they get a chance to to feed, to fight, find partners and just go crazy. They're basically living it YOLO style, and not realizing that they have a greater purpose at hand. And so a lot of packs don't get it. They don't really know. And where their true origins really lie would be in that of ancient Samaria, protecting humanity from all things profane, really, stopping that which meant to do harm at every level, physical, spiritual, and so on. And they followed a king who was considered blessed, who started the whole thing, more or less, negotiating a spirit of the wolf and finding a way to make warriors and have it be a passable genetic trait so that they could go down and do this, but also that other people could develop this as well, either through bites or through ritual turning. Like, you could do the same thing. So it's birth or turn. You can go either way. And it's kind of, again, it requires ritual to be able to do the turning. It's not just strictly bite somebody and off they go, because, again, you'd have some sort of systemic problem, every single time one of these pooches got nippy. So what happened is that the king and his queen, so you've got, the moon, who is worshipped as the female aspect, and the king's worshipped as the male aspect, were in charge of maintaining balance of humankind and making certain that all the demonic and horrifyingly spiritual nasties never got their hooks into humanity. And they failed, though. The vampires are a keen point of that. Their history is interwoven. You can't have the vampires all by themselves. You can only function with them being sort of a unified history. So the vampires and the werewolves actually share this. Now, Cain's been erased. Utterly obliterated. But he was younger than the other old ones by far. And the other old ones were cursed and torn up and put together again in whole new unholy ways. Now they basically faced werewolves as, primal enemies. Because you have the undead, the attempt at making something similar without having the real knowledge of it. Using, again, because humanity and beasts were very close together. Especially in the early days. So, when you have them with such a close relationship, that would who we'd be leaning on. So, the corrupted beast that envelops the vampire and makes them drink, parasitically drink the blood of those who are living and so on for their immortality. Werewolves just kind of live extremely long lives and are capable of doing everything as part of life, as part of nature, without having to go quite so uphill or against the grain. Unfortunately, the Dreaming City, as it were, gets put to grass, and the war goes completely sideways. Part of that is Tower of Babel, part of it isn't. It's more of the old ones kind of pushing their way through after a long time, because travel and the capacity to move from place to place and its cursory function to be able to manipulate it took years, many years. So the city was more or less the focus, but it took a long time and a very, very comprehensive knowledge of city and city states being able to make these kinds of sort of manipulative governments work so that they could do exactly what they needed by developing these armies. And there wasn't a significant number of werewolves like there is today. So they fought for as long as they could, but they couldn't fight a war on multiple fronts, just like you normally can't. The wolves were sort of overtaken. The vampires caused weaknesses all throughout their defenses, and eventually the profane wound their way through and started making things a mess. So you have all of the other supernatural beings kind of suddenly pushing in and starting to take up residence here on good old Earth. Well, they still fought the good fight, but after thousands of years, the initial houses that had been were reduced to very few. And those houses are all that remain at this point. So we have the House of Dust and Ash. We have... I think it's House of the Heavenly Moon next. Oh, I went too far. Yep, House of the Heavenly Moon. And then we have House of the Anathema. And then they get their milestones. So this may look a little bit lopsided, given the fact there's like 18 pages for vampires. We're going to be trimming a lot of that out because we don't want to have that many powers kind of shifted over. I think we'll probably do 2 a piece and save a lot of those other ones for future books. But the the main thing is here the werewolves are knocked down to 3 houses of perhaps maybe a dozen. They've been almost choked to death, but they've managed to survive in small knit communities that initially didn't seem to have a lot of success, really, or didn't seem to have the threat of success, if I'm going to be honest. The worst of it was the fact that the king and queen are, no longer present, and those werewolves that kept the histories honestly just couldn't keep hold of it. They were too small, too disparate, too out of the way, and not that they abandoned anything per se, just they couldn't keep the word going, and that made it hard to understand what it's about. And of course, the resentment and pent-up rage just built and developed into even more crazy. It's it's one of those things where it's like their story is particularly sad, and they ended up kind of having to go wild on their own, so they became feral. They did finally become more civilized later on, but in the midst of that, over thousands of years of not really understanding what the hell they're doing anymore, they've become sort of the rage fiends that everybody knows them to be, which is high levels of strength, feral claws and fangs, all of that, and having a general distaste for most other supernatural beings in general without really knowing why. Um, the Probably what makes them somewhat significant, at least to me, is the fact that they have this sort of overall. It may not be the individual story, but um, the overall element here is they are going to be high risk of nobility. Is kind of what I'm pushing towards. Um, they really do have the potential to push well above and beyond what would have been considered normal for most other things. The How do I put this? The one of the ones that probably epitomizes that pain and loss and so on is the House of the Anathema, which is kind of a manifestation of all of their anger, hate, rage, and just they're kind of systemic. Yeah, it's just kind of their systemic element here. It's they can't um, they can't really function. Uh, they can't really function in the same way that they used to, so they relied on hatred, and it wound up seeping in and creating all kinds of nasty mutations amongst everything that they had. So they became sort of flux, mutated, cosmic horror style, which the House of the Anathema are not they're not a well liked group at all. Just because of the fact that, well, they represent everything that kind of went wrong, and so they're kind of pushed out, and so that leaves like two houses that are still considered to be fairly noble, and then just all the rest of it just kind of winds up being what it is. But werewolves are kind of super strong. So you may have noticed actually from like the vampires and the rest of it, they all had strong elements here of these guys in these tables. The SFR that you get as a vampire, again, that's basically represented in the blood they take in and how they can manage it. The other piece of it is that the werewolves themselves don't get nearly as much. And the reason why is because they're oops, here we go. They're sort of interposed on how would I say it? Because of their physical strength and the lively features that they have, they don't really need to have huge pools of SFR. They don't need to draw on that, but that's what they utilize whenever they're actually working on or executing or activating any particular powers, abilities, etc. And they need that just because they have access to the supernatural powers, mainly from, like, if you were to look at it from like the Mother Moon standpoint of a sort. But kind of like what happens with the Strigoi in the vampires is they can kind of go a little bananas. They can mutate, grow extra limbs. It can get really wild and nasty if they're not careful. So yeah, they have the same kind of features point, but they're going to end up being pushed back into a certain sense of nobility because their underground story there is it's going to be mostly brought over from this background Sumerian who found himself brought back into Shadows or brought back into Night City accidentally. He did not realize that he was going to be in this, and he was cursed to basically go mad in a silver coffin. Wound up getting himself put back in there. So his story is similar to Vasal's in a way, and I didn't have that history brought out. This is another player that brought this in, but his name was Arad Lugal. And Arad was a fencer and defender of humanity and found himself sort of in a position where werewolves had lost their way, and he's going to start a whole new movement now. So, it's kind of a hippie-ish story. And forgive me if I'm getting a little dreamy-eyed here. Apparently the coffee's not hidden. So, but yeah, the werewolves themselves will have much more strength, even at lower levels to start off with. A lot less SFR to play with, but they're kind of the, I guess you could say they're kind of the barbarian out of Shadows as a whole. So, what this will bring across is just all of the resiliency. They also have the fastest regeneration rate, even when considering the regeneration of vampires. They can only do their regeneration in bursts. Like they basically spend what they need to, and they just immediately grow back whatever they got going on, even regenerating limbs if that's what's get lost. While werewolves cannot do it instantaneously like that, they do not burn out. Their regeneration is on all the time. While at the same moment, if they suffer anything that causes withering damage, they just can't get that. They heal as fast as any human would. And that goes for vampires too. Supernatural always have some kind of, kryptonite type regulation of a sort. It's always something. It's like Fae have iron, as an example. You hit them with any kind of cold iron, and it's bad news. So, yeah, got to be watching out for that. All right, I am going to take a very brief break here, but I will be back here 5 minutes or so. Okay? So, thanks for sticking out with me this long. We've got a little bit more to cover anyway, and I'll be back.
A lot better. Thanks for holding out. All right. Well, I think do a little bit. Hey, Grayley. You just show up. Just been sitting here and talking to myself. I get to sort of brag about the kind of progress we're making. So this is kind of what's neat. I know this is probably, I don't know how interesting this was, but this is kind of a I try, sort of. No, I don't. I got serious imposter syndrome all the time. Um, the project as it's running along, you can see that there are mass properties going on, but we can kind of say that there's some serious progress going on with the way this is all conjured up. And to roll around back to the front here, because like I said, we've got session 0, which is going to be employing everything you've seen in this, right down to a T here. We're going to be pushing it all through. Now, mind you, this is just the unedited raw element here, so you're getting kind of a sneak peek at a lot of this stuff. You may notice that there's a lot more from here to here. Supplementals, guys, just a bunch of supplementals, lots of stuff coming in, and there's going to be whole books about it, because I'm damn sure that this is not going to be the end of it, and it is pushing way too hard and way too well for me to give up on it. So, but this is kind of the start of it here, is that we're going to have a fully functional kind of this, ignoring these two pieces here for the most part. This is all stuff that we're going to go through and hunt on. We're getting through these guys now, and in fact, soon I'll be able to clear this out because these are all peer review, and then we're moving right along into it. And we got 46 pages. Like, these 4 categories now are just 46 pages long by themselves. And that is not including all of the common spells that I need and everything else. So it does include some of the equipment, however. So we're pushing 50, 60 pages right now, just in general for that. And we have way more than that already written and developed so far. It is moving. Yeah, Thursday is going to be an interesting night because we're going to be doing lots of character creation, and it's going to be discussion of character concept. You guys will get to see how it's done right at the start from the very, very beginning with all the new junk. I am stoked as hell to get that rolling, man. Stoked as hell. But yeah, these guys are just pushing right in. Let me see if I can find. We've got. Is this the vampires? Yeah. I've got. See, we go deep, man. Ooh, wow. Look at him go. Yeah, thanks to Bill and doing some of the work here. We've got everything that goes in for the initial construction of vampires and how they pushed across. Just, yeah, and clearly you can see he's got this all pushed together. Now, I will say that it was kind of amusing to hear him talk about this, because apparently if you start Googling up things like Sumerian vampire, it starts to get difficult to find any relevant information in terms of mythos, and turns into other stuff. Kind of hard to know exactly what, because he did not tell me, but it apparently kind of went in different directions. Let's see here. Back to this. I don't know if there was... Yeah. It's down below. Yeah, so... And here's all the stuff relative to werewolf. All of these things are the depictions of how, these were what we're cutting out because they're too related to the original systems and such that they were brokered in. So I realize that there is a mass, like a wall of text and information that's kind of going on with all this, but the sheer size of this project is ridiculous. I hope not. I hope it wasn't Rule 34 to answer that question, greatly. Actually, I think if it was,
his beard would have probably singed off his face, because I don't think he would have been able to handle that. I don't think that would have worked out well for him. He's not that kind of guy. Although it would have singed off, but he would have been like, yep, well that happened, and would have moved on. He's much closer to the Marcus Aurelius stoic in real life. He wouldn't handle it well, but it would just not show on his face. Ah, right. Oh, this was... I can't wait until I can do that, too. Is Earth Federation is the science fiction version of what Shadows will eventually become, too. Oh, wow. There's a lot of stuff in here I hadn't seen yet. But yeah, I mean... Magic is going to be following rules and systems that kind of go along these lines. And this was the write-up for that. Yeah, like I said, lots of information. I'm going to be investigating, and this is just kind of like little tidbits and things. I'm going to be investigating certain ways to make combat a bit more fascinating, perhaps a little chaotic, but not uncontrolled. Because for whatever reason, when I was much younger, I had sort of a serious disdain for the metric of in initiative. Like, initiative is important, but it's one of the methods, not the method, in terms of how to resolve, like battle orders in general. I used to just go back and forth around whenever I felt things were going in a certain way, and it would just organically evolve that way. I didn't need to use die rolls to pull that off, but yeah. So, there's a lot coming down the pipe, and I'm finally getting a chance to kind of brag about what's going on here, especially with like magic and the rest of it, which will probably be another segment all to itself. I can imagine there's probably going to be a good chance that there's going to be a just a full-blown magic and spells and working within that. I'm trying to drag out the conversation so that people can see it and kind of be interested, because like I said, this is going to be real. It's going to be hitting actual shelves at some point. I can't say exactly when, but it will be. Yeah, and this is discussion about the supplemental books. Yep. Oh, yeah, and then here's something that I can show that's got a lot into it. Lots of... So we've got... This is probably the least expansive so far. No, not by much. But, yeah, so we've got our armor listings with everything that includes, including all the major descriptions and everything else like that. Spend a lot of time writing those up so that we made sure that... So we have a differentiation for, like, standard and ballistic armors. Armors that basically allow you to kind of defend against, like, standard, brunt attacks that aren't bullets. And then the ballistic stuff, which has a combination of and like an energy ablative shielding and just standard either tritanium weave or Kevlar or something like that to help prevent damage from other things along those lines. I suppose we can do this too, just as a fast reference here. I don't think anybody's had a chance to see this either. This is until we can get a form fillable doc, and it will be a little compressed compared to this, but we're looking at about 4 pages in the real sheet too. It has, this is the character sheet all in all. Kind of proud of this. It took me several weeks to build because all of it works in a very specific way. As you can tell, all of these things are zeroed out. These are set to odd numbers. And there's literally tooltips on everything. All of it. Like, anything that's necessary. Like, these don't need definitions, but if you need to know what this is, or what this is supposed to tie into, or how to, like this is going to show you how to pull it all together, it's all here. Excuse me. And so, why this is exciting, is because this is going to be the sheet that everybody gets to use. And as I said, it reacts to what you do. So, if everything were 5, going down the list here, it manifests itself all the way over here, doing the same thing, putting in the proper bonuses, and auto-calculating all this other fun stuff right there too. And it gives you everything else that you might need to know depending on whatever's there. Plus we have, yeah, I appreciate that you actually like what you're looking at. So the main thing is that the front sheet's supposed to be kind of, because if you notice, you've got powers right here. And again, just explains how each one of these things is supposed to work. So you identify all of that other stuff. But you could have, this is egregious. Most characters are not going to have this many powers. I just needed space. If you're playing up to 150 sessions, like the milestones could possibly allow, you could fill this up. But I pity the GM that would ever attempt at trying to run characters in multiples with all of these filled into as powers, with likely the majority of this filled up with their weapons. I can't even imagine. It was a struggle for me at the end of this 2-year campaign trying to keep all that crap straight. And I was dealing with 2 different versions, because we had this particular version and then we had like 2.0 characters already built, and so I had to kind of do some really serious number crunching because well, I guess I'll just take you on a brief tour. Screw it. Let's do this. So this is kind of the basic run-of-the-mill. Yeah, I'll just walk you guys through how a basic character might be made. Each one of the power levels, there's this calculator that I built into it to help with the character creation whenever it's possible, right? You choose, let's say I was like, okay, we're going to do World Coming Down for whatever reason. All of these change according to that, but these guys are starting out at street level. So these are the baseline points and distribution. They would roll whatever they want to roll, so they might just get like, I don't know, 11. And you'll notice that this jumps up by that much. And if you were to, go through and pay for all this, these numbers are going to be completely wrong, by the way. But, let's say he had like an 8 body and he was like super intelligent and wanted lots of luck, right? All right. You got all your stuff and there you go. You've got your stats put in there. You'll just say, okay, I spent 41 points, boink, and it zeroes this out. That way you just know, okay, got it. Same goes for the rest of the stuff. You just filter it over, in this case that's 12, and then you say, okay, fine, I've spent my 52 skill points here on this sheet, where you can go through and just get all your skills filled in. And again, if you put a rank in something, let's say you're really badass at knowing how your situation works, that would be too high for a street level. In this case, I believe it is only a 4. But if you were to do that, it just auto-calcs right into this. And if you needed to say, like, you want to get the hell out of the way a lot. Okay, so here you go. These are your 2. And then if you went back to the front page, you see that dodge is filled in. This way you don't have to mess with going back to find all your combat stats. You're not going, flip, 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 flip. You're not having to do that because it's all right here in front. You can just take a look at it. There's your weapons, attacks, and damage, and all that other fun business. Any relevant powers, all right here on the front. And then you get to spend your 5 freebie points, and let's say you just take some disadvantages and you get like 8 more points there, so you have a total of 13. And we'll just say that's what boosted these up, and you say, okay, I'm done. I spent my 13 points, right? At this point, all of your basics, even though I've just kind of rushed through this, like if you're an Arcanist, you would have some of these guys filled in because this is where you're going to put your spells. And if you're a Cyborg, again, same thing. You're going to put your Cybernetics in here. That way you've got them all set up. And anything that's combat worthy will go right here in front. So you got all that there. And again, this is just so that whenever you get into a fight, every piece of combat worthy information is right here. You don't have to go digging around for it. But this sheet is hyper complex in terms of its construction, because like I said, every single one of these things has its definition and description detailing exactly how it pretty much works. See what I mean? And even at the top, if you just like this, it tells you how the character sheet works. So, yeah. Session 0 was going to be using this little bad boy. Oh, yeah, and this is where you get to put all your milestones. and how many sessions you have, and what your archetype is, and you can put in all kinds of cool stuff like that. And then character notes. You just go crazy. Oh yeah. And you get your minions and henchmen. Enter a mwahahaha. So that way you can have like people you really like. They get their own attacks, they get their own skills that you want to throw in there at ad nauseum. Whatever works. You can just record whatever it is and throw it in, and you can detail the amount of armor that they have and if they have any powers or gear, etc. And you get like 3 or 4 of these that you can just kind of fill in. This is going to be kind of like a separate sheet if you ever get to a point where you have minions. But always kind of looking out for that kind of stuff. And then I believe here, yeah, vehicles. You get vehicles and any other kind of interesting stuff that you want to write out. It's all been formulated to just be maximum awesome. So, all right. Yeah, lots to contemplate, lots to think about. I'm going to move this up here. Next Thursday, or this upcoming Thursday, is going to be a rip-roaring good fun. Tomorrow is going to be more Destiny. I've been brushing up on my skills, getting back up to snuff here. Ended up finishing out Legendary on the Witch Queen's quests again, just to kind of get myself all back into some semblance of actual usefulness. And so I'll be playing some of that just to we'll hang out, chill, talk. Whoops, can't do them all at once. Forgot about that. And yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much covers it, unless there's something of interest that ever came up. But it's been pretty good. God, I don't know. There's still so much to talk about. I think part of me is just running straight into the ground because I'm running out of gas, but I appreciate the fact that you guys were here. I think we'll probably just close it out for the evening and call it good. But everyone have a fantastic night, and I will catch y'all on the flip. Okay? Have a good night.